Our lesson today is in Exodus chapter 13, 14, and 15. We're going to get through all of it. Some of it we're going to be skimming, and some of it we won't. Certain things that I want to comment on as we go through. But if someone would read through verse 14 of chapter 13.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, and it is mine. And Moses said unto the people, Remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall no leaven bread be. This day came ye out in the month Abib, and it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he sware unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and in the 7th day shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall no leavened bread be seen with thee. Neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters. And thou shalt show thy son in that day, saying, This is done because of that which the Lord did unto thee when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be for a sign unto thee upon thine hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that the Lord's law may be in thy mouth, for which with a strong hand hath the Lord brought thee out of Egypt. Thou shalt therefore keep this ordinance in his season from year to year. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites, as he sware unto thee and to thy fathers, and shall give it thee, that thou shalt set apart unto the Lord all that openeth the matrix, and every firstling that cometh of a beast which thou hast, the males shall be the Lord's. And every firstling of an ass thou shalt redeem with a lamb. And if thou shalt not redeem it, then thou shalt break its neck. And all the firstborn of a man among the children shalt thou redeem. And it shall be when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, What is this? That thou shalt say unto him, By strength of hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage.
Okay, this is actually the institution of the Passover was obviously the night in Egypt where they were instructed to slay the lamb and put the blood on the doorpost and lintels of each house, and to remain in the house all night, not to come out. But this is a description then. They have left Egypt. They're traveling. They've not gone far. But God is already beginning to instruct them in His ways and what is expected of them. He tells us how that the firstborn of every, and doesn't mention it, but it's every clean animal belongs to the Lord. What that simply means is it's going to be sacrificed. And every unclean, and I thought it was kind of humorous myself in verse 13. He kind of likens us to a wild ass. Yeah. We are kind of mule-headed. Human nature is such that we are kind of mule-headed. But very simply, he said, if you don't redeem it, you kill it. Which is, in effect, our lot if we refuse the Lord's grace. We're going to die in our sins. It's just that simple. But at any rate, as we look at this, he gives us these instructions of what they're to do in preparation for the Passover. And there's a week's worth of unleavened bread, or actually just unleavened period, there too, as we go farther, and as they go farther, and God gives specific instructions to Moses, then we find that they're to clean the house of leaven. There's not to be any leaven at all in the house for a week. And they are to eat unleavened bread all that week. But at any rate, he gives these instructions to them early. And the only thing that I really know to liken this to is the fact that God never leaves us in the dark. It's just that simple. God never leaves us in the dark. We have now a new covenant under which we live, a new covenant that was originally given to Israel and they rejected it. And God's instructions are very plain. We live under grace. Yes, we live under grace. But God tells us to do some things in service to Him. We're to put away some things, in particular sin. And if we really dig into and delve into the New Testament, which is the New Covenant, we find that He names specific sins that we are to just put away. But at any rate, before we pass on from this, and I want to just deal slightly with the institution of the Passover, I want you to notice in verse 5 something. It says, And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he sware unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month, which is, he named in verse 4, the month of Abib. When I was in seminary, we had a class called The Bible in 8 Ages. My old friend, Brother Bill Gibson, used to call it Boredom by 8 Ages because our teacher read to us out of the book. But we were taught that this land grant covered all the way across Saudi Arabia to the Euphrates River. Well, the Euphrates River is involved in the land grant because that's the northern boundary. But everywhere you read where God promised these lands to Israel or to Abraham, and then later to Isaac, and then to Jacob, and then Jacob has his name changed to Israel, we find it names very specifically the land of the Canaanites. And it speaks, and here it names the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Where did they live? In Canaan. The Jordan River is roughly the eastern boundary of the land grant. What Israel is occupying now is close to the land that was given them, other than the fact that they have to deal with the Palestinians. I was reading a thing the other day on the history of the Philistines and who they thought they were. And when I read it, it just confirmed something that I've said all along. bunch of Philistines. They just changed their name to Palestinians because they're occupying about the same spot that they had when David was dealing with them, and with Solomon even was dealing with them. Saul dealt with them unsuccessfully. But at any rate, we see God specifically telling them the land that they're going to and the land that he has given to them. And once again, it just goes back to what I said in the beginning. God never leaves us in the dark. God is always very specific in what he wants of people. People sometimes want to pass the buck and say, when they get caught in something, they say, well, I didn't know. There's no reason for people not to know. God has been very specific, both in the Old Covenant with Israel and in the New Covenant under which we live. And again, I'll point out, it was Israel's covenant. It was given to them. They rejected it. Someday they'll accept it. But nonetheless, God is always very specific in his instructions to man. We don't serve a God who says, well, just take a guess or take a stab at it. He says, this is how I want it. This is how I want it. Obviously, all of these rituals that he gave them was a teaching tool. When we get to the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, I think to the Galatians, told them that it was our schoolmaster. It was teaching us what Christ was going to do when he came, what God in the flesh was going to do to redeem his people. But at any rate, we see here they've established the instructions concerning the Passover. And in verse 14 it says, when thy son asketh thee in the time to come, saying, what is this? That thou shalt say unto him, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. Now, the next verse says, and it came to pass when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that the Lord slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all that openeth the matrix, being males, but all the firstborn of my children I redeem. Now, I made mention of this. Was I here last week? I was here last week. I made mention of this last week. The obvious fact that Pharaoh was not the firstborn. He didn't die. Which, whether he's the same Pharaoh or not, who can say? But the obvious reason that he would be Pharaoh and not be firstborn is that the firstborn was a woman or female. Because females couldn't rule then. I may get a slap in the face over this, but in God's perfect order, females aren't to rule today. But what we're going to see is, well, I'll get ahead of myself. It says, and Moses took the bones, God led the people out, led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you. You shall carry up my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day a pillar of cloud to lead them in the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. What we're going to learn in this is God's not through with Egypt. They should have learned their lesson in the death of the firstborn. I mean, especially, they've gone through all of these plagues, and it's not happenstance. It's not an accident. The locust, people could have said, well, it's just bad luck. Because they locusts around today. When they swarm like that, they'll eat up a crop. But each of these, Moses went and said, if you don't let us go, this is what's going to happen. And the next day, guess what? All the way through. And then when it comes down to the death of the firstborn, they should have learned their lesson. But they didn't. And quite simply, God wasn't through with Israel, with Egypt. He says, I'm going to teach you, and I'm going to teach the whole world that I am God. Sometimes I think we lose sight of the fact that God is who He is. Isaiah quotes the Lord as saying, there's no one else, just me. I'm it. We see people rise to power and fame today, and they somehow get a God syndrome, and they think they're God. They can just do whatever they want. But there's always somebody bigger. There's always somebody bigger that says, guess what? You're not. There is none bigger than God. When He says, I'm God, He's just simply saying, nobody. Now, understand this is a human takeaway because God loves us. But nobody is bigger than me. I want to do it. Who's going to stop me? I am God. He says, when I'm through with Egypt, the whole world is going to know I'm God. There was a path. The Israelites were basically in the land of Goshen, which is in the, I wish I had a map to show you, which is in the northeastern region of Egypt. Very fertile land. And there was a path, literally a highway, that went from Egypt right up the seacoast. Well, not exactly the seacoast, but close to the seacoast, through a valley in Canaan that we recognize as Jezreel, Valley of Jezreel, or of Megiddo, and right on up and back down the Fertile Crescent, it was a trade route. Highway. All they had to do was just march up there. God didn't take them that way. He took them, chapter 14, let's look at chapter 14. In chapter 13, it tells us that God didn't take them that way. And he didn't take them that way intentionally, because Pharaoh would see, hey, they ain't got away yet. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Heroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal Zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. Well, let me do this. I've not quite got this fresh in my mind, so I'm going to do this. Pi-Hahiroth, according to Brown, Driver, and Briggs, says place where sedge grows. I didn't know what sedge was, so I looked it up. It's a grass.
Was it sedge or sage?
It's sedge. It's not sage. Sage is singular, but there's several varieties of sedge. It's a grass. It grows in clumps from the pictures that I saw. Strong says it means mouth of the gorges. Being a language student, you might guess who I'm going to believe. I'm going to take Brown, Driver, and Briggs, because it's a Hebrew lexicon. However, a place where sedge or grass grows, we're talking about the Sinai Peninsula. The Red Sea comes up and it parts into the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. They came into the Sinai Peninsula. They could have went straight on up to Canaan. God didn't take them there. He took them and turned them down a valley. Actually, I guess you could probably call it more likely call it a canyon, being the Sinai Peninsula, because it's just, mountainous. He took them down this valley to Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal Zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. This canyon comes down and it opens up into kind of like a prairie, right next to the Gulf of Aqaba. When I was in school, they taught that they crossed the Red Sea and the Gulf of Suez into the Sinai Peninsula. Now, they went through the Sinai Peninsula, and what they crossed was the Gulf of Aqaba. How do I know? There's proof of it now. There's absolute proof of it now. From where they were camped, over to Saudi Arabia or the Arabian Desert, there is a path strewn with Egyptian chariots. And on the other side, there is a pillar that the scriptures tell us Solomon went and erected when Israel crossed the Red Sea. So, here they are in this opening. There's mountains this way, there's mountains this way, and there's the Red Sea this way, and the Egyptian army is this way. The only thing standing between them and the Egyptian army is this pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. So Pharaoh, at any rate, when he sees this, it says, Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land. The wilderness hath shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants were turned against the people. And they said, what have we done? Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? Dollar signs pop up in their eyes. What on earth have we done? And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and the captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea beside Pi-hath-Keroth, before Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh says, I've got them. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord, and they said unto Moses, because there's no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? We find this to be a consistency for the nation of Israel throughout their wanderings. They complain constantly. Oh, I wish we was back in Egypt. They remembered the leeks and the melons and all of that, and they didn't remember the taskmasters. They were willing to give up their freedom for a little bit of handout. Kind of reminds me of how our country is today. Many in our nation are willing to give up their freedom for a handout. That's all I'll say on that. If I get off on political view, we won't get this done. When Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid, and they cried out unto the Lord, and they said to Moses, in verse 12, is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it is better, had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Moses just simply said, fear not. The Lord shall fight for you. And ye shall hold your peace. Now, let me see if I can summarize the rest of this. Yes, I can summarize the rest of this chapter. I can summarize the rest of this chapter rather than read it. I'm not much of a reader. I'm slow. I'm slow of speech. I'm slow of mind. When Pharaoh's army came upon them, God set that pillar of cloud between them. It was thick enough and dark enough that they couldn't see through it. I said, we go charging through this, ain't no telling what we'll run into. I'm just ad-libbing here kind of right now, but it was thick enough and dark enough that they couldn't strategically go racing through it. In my opinion, I don't think they could have penetrated it anyhow because it's God. It was the Shekinah glory of God. And the pillar of fire was on them at night. Now Moses has been instructed to raise his rod over the sea. And this pillar of fire is here, and it's nighttime, and the Egyptians are over here, and it's pitch black. It's just dark. They can't see nothing. And over here, it's bright as daylight. And Moses has got his rod stretched out. The sea begins to open up. This is one of the most notable miracles of the Bible. The sea began to open up. Some of you once country people, have you ever been around a pond that dried up? When it first dries up, it's dry and it's kind of crusty looking on the top. But you step out on it, the first thing you know, you're knee deep in mud. God didn't do that. He opened up the sea and he dried the ground. And it talks about a wind that God used all night. But nonetheless, the sea opened up and the ground is dry. It's not crusty dry where you step in it and you sink. It's dry. At least for the Israelites. It's hard not to say Israeli now because it's, they've dropped the T-E, Israelites. They crossed over on dry ground. Now, when they're all out, they're on the side of the Arabian desert. The cloud has been lifted, and it's over here. And here comes Pharaoh's army. Now, it says, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the, well, no, let me see. Where does it say it? fainted now. And I got too little time to hunt for it. It says when they took off after them, they got out there and the wheels fell off the chariot. I can imagine that it's already become miry again, and they're marring down in mud. But regardless of whether that's so or not, they got out there in the midst of the sea. Their wheels fell off of their chariots, and God waited until the entire army was in the sea, and He brought the waters in on top of them. This has to be the most notable miracle throughout the whole Bible, including those which Jesus did. I mean, Jesus raised the dead, more than one. But God did this, and we talk about supernatural. Miracles are things that are supernatural. You know, people want to say salvation is a miracle. No, it's not. That's the way God does it. Plan of salvation is clear. This is how God does it. And, you know, this is a miracle. That is a miracle. A miracle is when God supersedes nature. Something supernatural. This is supernatural. Waters are walled up, ground's dry, and all of a sudden the ground's mushy and the water comes in. Verse 30, thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. You know, I can imagine the turmoil of the water boiling back in. They were bodies floating. I mean, there were some of them still at the bottom of the sea, but there was bodies floating. Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and His servant Moses. Now, they're across the sea, the Egyptian army is destroyed. There's no way that the whole world didn't hear this. I mean, they didn't have the multimedia that we have today. They didn't have near the region that we have today to cover either. Then Moses, chapter 15. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for He hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath He thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and He is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare for Him a habitation. My God, Father's God, and I will exalt Him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is His name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host have cast into the sea. He's chosen captains also and are drowned in the Red Sea. And it goes on and on and on. And they sing these praises. They sing all these praises. And it tells how that all of the dukes and so forth of Canaan and the kings have heard, and mighty men of Moab, how that God has delivered them. And in verse 20, Miriam, the prophet, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam answered them, "Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea." Now, verse 22. I'm going to do this just real quick, and then I'm going to quit. I'm done. You don't even have to stick a fork in it. I'm done. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days into the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" 3 days after seeing God destroy the entire Egyptian army in a miraculous event. And here we are. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And that's the story of Israel. From here all the way to when they go into the land. Just every time there's an obstacle, they say, "What are we going to do?" You ain't going to do nothing. God's going to do it. And the same is so today. God is in control. He loves us, and he'll take care of us. May not be the way we want it, but